My name, CSI 5000. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Tom Stiles, and this is Tom's Radio Room Show number 345. My little robot here gave you a little introduction, and we're going to do a show today. Let me get him out of the way because we need to get to these radios, and I need to turn his voice off, otherwise he'll be interrupting me. There we go. And I thank everybody for sending me suggestions for future shows, and also for the questions I've been getting that could be formulated into a show. And what I mean by that is where a simple explanation via a comment, reply, or an email won't quite answer the question. What I plan on doing is some short videos trying to answer that question or those questions. And today we're going to do one, and today we're going to attempt, and keep in mind I'm no expert, to show you one method, my method of tuning a single sideband frequency. And hopefully the bands will cooperate and I can show you how that I do it. Now this is just one method, and it's a method I use, and it may not be the best method, but it's a method I use. And if you go back to one of my previous shows, and I'll put the show number down here someplace, I attempted to do a show explaining single sideband and what it is and how it works. And like I say, I'll put the show number down here, and so you can go back and refer to that if you want to. But basically on shortwave you can listen to AM. Actually on shortwave there are a few FM stations, very few, but there's a few FM stations. And you can also listen to what's called single sideband, which is just a sideband of what would normally be an AM station. And the stations that broadcast in single sideband, and there's two single sidebands, there's an upper and a lower, are things such as the amateur radio people use single sideband. That way they can get further out on their transmission by concentrating all the power of their transmitter into just a single sideband instead of spreading it into two sidebands in a carrier. Also, the military broadcast in single sideband. A lot of the utilities that you see on that you hear on shortwave are being broadcast in single sideband. For instance, marine weather is broadcast on 6.604 megahertz, and it's on sideband, and it's on upper sideband. So you have to have, number one, you have to have a radio that is capable of receiving and tuning single sideband. And then number two, you have to know a technique of how to tune it in, because it can be a little difficult if you're not used to tuning a single sideband station. And it also can get a little frustrating. And I think that's where the questions came from that were sent to me about how do I tune single sideband. And another station that's quite popular is a military frequency 11.175, which is for communicating with aircraft over shortwave, and again it's in single sideband. Okay, now there are different, not my excuse me, my camera is going to get in my way, so I'm going to be bumping my camera, so I'll excuse myself now for doing that. There's a couple of different ways of tuning single sideband, and there's a couple of different ways that it's implemented on radios. Let me turn this down. For instance, the excuse me, the Grundig 750 is kind of the old school way of tuning single sideband, in that you have a separate, and let me zoom in here and move the Sangean away for a second. Zoom, 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 zoom. Okay, my light's a little bright there, but that's okay. But anyway, on the 750, you have a button here, a button. Yeah. You have a button here called or named SSB, single sideband, and you push that button once and it takes you to upper sideband. You push it again, it takes you to lower sideband. Then once you're in the single sideband, either upper or lower mode, now you use this knob here, which is SSBO. It's a BFO, beat frequency oscillator. Again, if you go back to my other video, I try to explain what that is, how it's mechanized. And then you have to fine tune it, I'll call it, that signal, so that you can understand the signal. So we're going to try that right now. And the signal I had, of course, now is gone. So when we're in the amateur radio band here at 7.250, a few minutes ago there was some activity here. It's gone now, of course. So let's see if we can find another one. It's always a problem. Oh, maybe I don't have, yep, I didn't have my antenna switched to this radio. Okay, let's turn off single sideband first. So here's AM. That's another difference you'll notice is when you're in AM mode, you get a lot more background noise. So we're going to tune in AM mode. See if we can find. Okay. There's a single sideband transmission, and you can hear, I hope, that it sounds like Donald Duck or something. Can't understand it. So, since we're in the turn it down for a second. Since we're in the 7.2 megahertz range, typical rule of thumb is that the amateur radio operators use lower sideband for voice communications and upper sideband for digital communications. Not always the case, but that's typical. So we need to go to lower sideband. So we'll turn this back on. So we'll hit single sideband once, is upper, twice, is lower. So now we're in lower sideband. Now we have to come over and use the BFO. Now what I do is the range of the BFO on this particular radio is not real wide. So you will find yourself, and this is where people get frustrated and confused, you'll find you're not unable to get the station tuned in so you can understand what the people are saying. And that's because you initially started too far away from where they're actually transmitting. So what I do is I interact using these two knobs, the tuning knob and the BFO knob. So I tuned it in as best as I could while I was in the AM mode. So now I'm going to use the BFO. And now they're going to stop talking. Come on, boys. There we go. So I'm slowly, very slowly tuning this. And the other thing that's kind of frustrating is transmission is not always there. Plus there could be multiple transmissions. Okay, so I was not able to tune it in. So what I need to do is go back to the tuning knob and try to tune it in better that way. And of course they always stop talking. But I'm going to guess they're on this even frequency of 7.25. So I'll put it there. Go back to the BFO. And if they would, almost had it tuned. They stopped transmitting. Okay, pretty well tuned in. I'm kind of reaching here to not knock over the camera. But you can see that on this particular radio, this BFO knob, you have to tune it ever so carefully to get it tuned in. And then there's another conversation coming in. And the other thing is, it's a little disheartening, is the fact that if you're hearing, for instance, on the amateur band, you have two people, or at least two people, talking. Their transmitters might slightly be tuned differently, so you might get one tuned in on the single sideband using your BFO in this case, and then when the other one starts transmission, his voice might be distorted. And so you kind of have to, like, okay, let's see if I can get something in between the two stations that pretty good but not perfect for either one. So it's a compromise. Now, if you're listening to, let me see if it's on the air right now, and if I can receive it, I should say. Let's go to 6604. And that should be upper sideband. No, that is normally weather information, and I just right now I can't receive it. The time is 7:40 a.m. on the east coast of Florida, so that's what the time is. I'm trying to receive it. So that's one method of tuning single sideband, and it's one implementation on a radio for single sideband. Now, if we come over here to the Sangean, and let me see if I can move the camera without too much wiggling. It is different. The Sangean, this is the 909X. These are the two radios that I like to use most often. It's slightly different in that it does not have a BFO knob. It does tune single sideband, and then I'll try to show you right now. So let's turn it on, get the right button here. And we had 7.250 before, and I have to use an external antenna because there's just too much noise. Oh! They like those stations. Turn that volume down. Okay. So I'm at 7.250, which is what I had over there. Again, it's an amateur radio band. And it has a button right here called SSB. And if I hit it once, it goes to the lower sideband first, which is what I want. So I just leave it there. Now, okay, so I'm not tuned in to that single sideband signal. So on this radio, you just use the main tuning knob that you use for tuning any station. So that's all there is. There's no separate BFO. So then what you do is you push the step button to put it in slow tune, which means it will increment the frequency less than if you had it in fast tune, which that's where you can tune through the band real quickly. So I got it in slow. Now you just use your normal tuning dial and see if you can tune it in. Okay. Now, another, I've got it pretty well tuned in. So, this one was a little easier to tune because you didn't have a separate knob, a separate BFO knob. You just use the main tuning knob. In most of your modern, I'll call it, radios that have single sideband, not all radios have single sideband, that's how you tune it. You don't have a separate tuning knob. Other radios will have a main tuning knob, and then on the side it will have a small single sideband or fine tuning knob, so you can fine tune the frequency to tune in that single sideband. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find where that single sideband frequency is as opposed to the normal AM frequency. So you can see another thing on this radio. It shows me that I moved from 7.250 to 7.251. So that's really where that single sideband signal is. Where on the Grundig 750, since you're typically not moving the frequency, although that's one way to adjust it if your BFO range is not enough, then you may not notice that the frequency when you were using the BFO only had really changed. So that signal really wasn't at 7.250, it was at 7.251. So that's something you have to keep in mind. So if you're putting in your records where you found that particular signal, you need to keep in mind that the 750 and radios that have a separate BFO, the reading on the frequency may not be the actual reading or the actual frequency that the station is broadcasting on. Again, I am no expert. So anyway, hopefully that shows you a little bit about tuning a single sideband signal. And like I say, it is a little tedious, but after you've done it for a while, you will develop a knack for tuning it. But like I'll say on this radio, this BFO, you gotta really be sensitive, shall I say, when you're tuning that. Otherwise, you're gonna jump right over where you want to be on that BFO, and you'll miss it. And then if you try to tune it back, you'll jump over it again. So you'll get frustrated and go, I can't tune single sideband. Well, you can. You just got to be patient. And like I say, actually, more precisely what I do, and I can't do it the way the camera is set up, is I use two hands, and I put one hand on the tuning knob and one hand on the BFO, and I go back and I swap back and forth trying to tune that signal in. That's how I actually do it on this radio, two-handed. But like I say, the camera's in the way, and my shoulder would be in the way if I did it that way this morning, so you couldn't see anything I was doing. So anyway, I hope that answers the questions. There's a lot of things on single sideband to listen to. Like I say, most of the amateurs operate on single sideband. Not all, some still operate on AM. And there are a lot of utilities. What I mean by utilities is weather information, military transmissions, airline transmissions. A lot of that stuff, not all, but a lot of that stuff is on single sideband. So you'll need to have a radio that has single sideband capability and know how to tune single sideband. Again, there's upper and lower sideband. So if you enjoyed this show, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Thanks to everyone that has subscribed. Bye-bye.